right. Hello, everybody.
Hello. Welcome to Fate's Wide Wheel. I'm Sam.
I'm Dennis, and this week we are excited to welcome back to the podcast Lauren Milberger, writer, actor, podcaster from the Murphy Brown podcast, from FYI, the Murphy Brown podcast. Welcome back, Lauren.
Oh, it's great to be back. Thank you for inviting me for a return visit.
Yes, we're excited to have you on a regular episode. If you missed the previous episode that Lauren was on, we just discussed Quantum Leap lore in general, the Calavici legacy in general. But now, we're excited to have you back for a regular episode, especially this episode. I'm so excited to talk about this episode.
I'm very excited to talk about this episode. I think I keep saying, oh, the most current one. Oh, this is my new favorite. Oh, this is my favorite. And so I'm sure it'll change when we get the next one, but right now, and the current run. And there've been some great ones and some other ones that are definitely tied or in my second position, but thought this was really a stellar episode.
Absolutely. I thought so too. Well, should we just jump right in and talk about the episode info?
I mean, I don't see why not.
I know usually I do a description, but there is no description given because this is so weird. It's not on IMDb. Usually the press photos and some kind of episode description drops a few days before. Then we get the screener a couple days before the episode airs. But in this case, we got the screener on Monday? And
was it Tuesday? I think it was Tuesday.
Or Tuesday,
yeah.
And then the press photos just dropped a couple of hours ago.
Now, I will say that thanks to NBC's press releases, we do have their blurb for the episode description, which of course is part of what we get with the production photos and screeners, etc. And their episode description is: when Ben leaps into one of 5 people in an elevator at a 1962 nuclear reactor, he must figure which one triggers a bomb that kills them all. Each time the bomb goes off, he leaps into another one of them an hour earlier, and the scene resets on a loop. If I'm being honest, I feel like it gives away a little too much. Like, I would not.
Oh, really?
I do, yeah. Like, I avoided this, or at least just wasn't paying attention to it when I first read it. So when I watched the episode, I didn't know about the bomb. I guess I had forgotten because I know we read a couple of sides from this. And yeah, I think that this is an episode where it's kind of like knowing that stuff is fine because this is an episode you're going to want to rewatch. So spoilers don't hurt it at all. And yet I feel like, some of that stuff, maybe I didn't need to know.
I mean, some people feel that trailers are spoilers also, right? Sure. So that's a whole discussion too, like what is a spoiler and what isn't. And sometimes I think I want to know so much that maybe I don't have a sense of what is a spoiler anymore, perhaps. I hope not. It's funny because I saw the trailer, right? As I know you did as well. So it didn't sound that, but no, I see what you're saying. It's the least you know about this episode is probably for the better.
Yeah,
in any case, because it's a mystery. It's a mystery.
Yeah, and I mean, look, you find out about the bomb, early enough in the episode, but it's. Yeah, I don't know. It's a little something that maybe I would have held back. Maybe not. I don't know. I don't write these things for a living. Somebody else gets paid to do that. This episode was directed by Margarita Matthews, the ace. No, we're so lucky to have so many wonderful writers on this show, and she certainly qualifies as one of them. Of course, her prior episode was "O Ye of Little Faith," and I think that this is another home run for her. Prior to this, she worked on The End Game, which is another NBC show, and Hotel for the Holidays, which it's kind of incredible the work that she's done on Quantum Leap. I feel like, given
Agreed.
The fact that she has, kind of a slimmer resume compared to some of the other writers on the show, we're talking literally like 10 episodes, if that, under her belt in television before she came to Quantum Leap. And I feel like the work she's done has just been stellar. She's also credited as the story editor for the series. So, in addition to being a writer and also a producer on the show. So,
and story editor tends to be sort of an entry level position in a writer's room. So that makes sense.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I mean, I just think the quality of work is fantastic, and I can't wait to see what she does next. I do know that she has a big hand in the finale, so that'll be interesting to see.
Oh, that makes me happy, because I think most people know Ye of Little Faith is also in my top 5 of favorite of the new series. Like before that was definitely one of my favorites, even though I go like, as they get along, they become my favorites. But if I had to like really look back, make my list, that's one of my favorites. Because of the balance between using old lore without maybe saying that you're using old lore. So we all know that it's being used. So it's based in something from the original series. And listen, writers' rooms, everybody works on it. It's just one person's name is attached to it. So I'm sure that this is also just the writing staff in general coming together. But that's when I feel like the show really works, right? Is when we have a balance between not just the project and the leap, which this one was so well done, but also having like a small foot, I think, but we're all biased, right? Like in the past, without actually saying it is. Although Sam gets the most name drops
checked,
of any episode. I was like, oh, I was really surprised. The first one, I was like, okay, cool. And then the second one, I was like, oh, okay, all right.
Well, and the way that his name is used in both, and again, like you say, there are multiple hands, that work on these scripts as they go through the process. But from what we've been told, certainly it tends to be like, go away and write the script. That happens, they come in, there might be some tinkering done, and then and then that's what we get. And so in this case, certainly with both of Margarita's episodes, the way that Sam is used and the way that his name is dropped, I think it has even more impact than just a simple sort of like Easter egg, in particular with his faith being a part of Ye of Little Faith, and now here with his very existence being a part of this. Is he alive? Is he dead? What is magic holding on to here? And so I love it. And I think that, again, she continues to just do excellent work on the show.
Yeah. And I would say that Ye of Little Faith, not to talk about a different episode, but Ye of Little Faith is also a big giant Al Easter egg to me.
Sure.
And I think we do get some really interesting information from Janice in this episode as well.
Yes.
And I think we'll probably talk about it a little bit later, but sort of the theme of ghosts is really interesting, I think, from the series in general, but also through this episode, which I think are some big hints to what's to come.
Sure.
Absolutely.
And I was going to say,
but I was going to say, oh, sorry.
No. Yeah. I was going to say, them name dropping Sam so significantly, and then at the end of the episode we get to think about I'm going to give you a name about who told Ben to leap.
Oh, see, because
that's deep. I don't think it's going to be Sam,
right? Well,
in my heart I really wish it would, and I know that it was, and I know that a lot of fans feel that way. I don't think that's going to be it, but if that was
I had
my wish list,
I think that if maybe they all had been filmed and this was like dropped all at once, I might have thought that. But unfortunately, like my industry brain is like, well, I know it can't be Sam. And I hate that though, because it's still fun to think, right? But I'm interested to talk about that moment though, because I'm curious where it's gonna go, because unless this is all part of Janice's plan, which it might be, it seemed to go against what she said last week. About don't say anything out loud. And so I was like, I don't know if this is real, Janice. Why are you doing this? So I don't know, unless she says the name is you, which I don't know how that's going to really be helpful, because how is Addison going to believe that, right? Like, oh, sure, it's me. Like, it's got to be something that's going to change her mind.
I have a list of
help the story forward.
I have a list of 4 possibilities, and we'll talk about it later. But I will say Addison's not on it.
Yeah.
I would say we should back up and give our non-spoiler thoughts.
Well, before we do that,
that's why I'm trying to I'm like, oh, are we doing this non-spoiler part? Are we doing the spoiler part? I don't know.
Before we do that, I do want to talk about the director, Pamela Romanowski. She has directed episodes of The Blind Spot, Riverdale, and Dash and Lily, as well as directing the film The Adderall Diaries prior to this. Most recently directed an episode of Walker Independence. And, has been directing for over 10 years now, really, with a variety of films, shorts, and television series, which seems to be the bulk of what she's done recently. I have to be completely honest, I've not seen any of the other work that she's done. If I were to say anything about her work on this episode, it's that it's one of those weird things where sometimes we talk about you notice the director in the bad ways. Other times you talk about you notice the director in the good ways. However, I think when you don't notice the director, that's always kind of a good thing. Like, it's not a bad thing. And I felt like I didn't really notice the director in this episode. There's some wonderful stuff. Like, it's shot very well. Again, I think the editing team that works in Quantum Leap deserves a huge shout out, because I think that they always, assemble these really wonderful episodes. Who knows exactly what they have to work with, but in terms of the overall quality of it, I thought it was great. I thought that everything worked really well. So, well,
I think the
welcome
direction
back.
in this is, I think the direction in this is also very important, whether you notice it or not, because, like, to me, it felt like kind of if you took an escape room and adapted it into a television series. And so the fact that you need to focus on the important things while also not giving away what the important things are,
right?
And then repeating those over and over again, and so to me, I felt it was important, because as soon as it started, I was like, okay, that soda is going to be important. There's a click, there's that, there's this, and I noticed more of them as I rewatched it again, but it made you take notice to, it's almost if it's Clue, right? Like, here's the candlestick and here's the wrench, and we're going to show you how all of this is important. And maybe that's why it felt very much like an escape room, but also for other reasons that, you have to figure out all the clues in the escape room that are going to help you get out.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic way to look at the episode. It's an episode that unfolds just a little bit differently each time, obviously, from the different perspectives that we get, and certainly when we talk a little bit more spoilery, we'll go into kind of what some of that means, but what Ben has at his disposal, and further what the team has at their disposal, is incredibly important to the episode as it goes on, and just kind of how those clues are used, and how, again, I mean, it's written so well, and I feel like the way that the story unfolds just makes so much sense. And I guess that this will just be my non-spoiler capsule review, is that I feel like in some ways this is to me probably, I'm not going to say it's my favorite episode, but I'm not going to say it's not my favorite episode. This episode feels so much like the perfect encapsulation, the perfect like distillation of what this iteration of Quantum Leap is.
Agreed,
and can be. And it's funny because not only does it feel like Quantum Leap, right, but it feels like this Quantum Leap. Like,
particularly that teaser.
Right. And I sent a message to somebody just saying, like, this is clearly, like y'all's Quantum Leap. Like, this is, but it feels like Quantum Leap. And so I just think it's incredibly successful in that respect. And it's rewarding on multiple viewings, which I think it's interesting, because we get a lot of TV these days that we know people binge watch and then they'll rewatch. And, there's so many comfort shows out there. I mean, obviously, like, my wife and I watch The Office, like, probably every year, you know what I mean? Or at least a run of episodes at some point. But the thing is that there are certainly little things that we might notice differently when we're doing a rewatch. But for me personally, I think that there's not a lot of television out there that I feel like I have to rewatch, that I want to rewatch, because of the way the story is being told. And this episode, obviously, the way the story is told, it bears a rewatch, which is cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I the biggest thing that stood out for me was is that teaser, which is it like a 10-minute teaser? That's pretty long, right? But obviously you need to have that set up it's a perfect teaser. But what I loved is that it did something that the original show wasn't able to do, which is use the project to build tension in the leap.
Sure.
And I just remember thinking, for the first time I saw that teaser, I was like, oh yes, this is, like you said, this is their show, right? This is how they're able to balance and use it, because that kind of tension is something we would never have gotten with Sam, because we would have seen Al finding all that information out. He would have just popped up and they would have found out together, which was still wonderful. We loved the show, but I mean, I knew that he couldn't be dead, and I was crying because they were building the tension so much to Addison just like falling to the ground. I was like, even on a second viewing, I teared up. Like, Laurie,
Same.
you know he's fine.
Yeah. Same here. I feel like, we talked about like, we keep saying like, this is a favorite episode. This is a favorite episode. That was my first thought after I finished watching it the first time. And I got annoyed with myself because like, damn it, I can't do that every episode because I've done it with Oh Ye Little Faith and after paging Dr. Song. And I think sometimes when I say that this is my most favorite episode so far, most favorite, yeah, we'll go with it. Favorite episode so far is that the episode tickled my brain in a way that the previous episodes haven't yet. And Sam, I think you said it exactly. It's like this is this team's version of Quantum Leap. But it was very, I was excited in a way I haven't been since like the best time travel episodes of The Flash, the CW's The Flash from the first couple of seasons, or Voyager, which I didn't watch all of Voyager until like 2017. So like the best time travel episodes of Voyager, or the alternate reality or time travel episodes of The Orville. And it was like, it's where the episodes are fun, they're quippy, they have that sense of humor that you need to have in an episode where someone dies repeatedly, because you got to keep it kind of light for those.
Right.
But also, like you said, Lon, point out like the scene where Addison breaks down and Ian is holding her, like, yes, both times I just teared up. And it was like we just need to see that like that one time, and that just like sets up the stakes of everything.
Yeah, and because the whole teaser builds to that also. Like if we just saw that, it wouldn't have had as much of an impact, because it's building to that moment, and then you realize what's actually happening.
Yeah.
Far out,
man. Groovy.
Now, is this the first time in this new series that we have seen an extended opening from what we got from the previous episode? Because I feel like paging
that's a good,
because I feel like paging Dr. Song, it was edited to look like elevator opening up, stepping out onto the balcony of the nuclear reactor.
I think you're right. I hadn't noticed that, but you're right.
And you certainly didn't have the thing of Mo, the janitor, looking out and Robert Picardo going, "What are you doing here?" Like that was not
right.
Which was
so
great.
I think this is the first extended thing that we got. Yes.
I always enjoy when in the moment you have to go, well, in reality he really wouldn't be there, so we need to comment on it.
Yes.
Yeah, well, and I mean, Robert Picardo is awesome, and
the best.
I like he's a face that we know from a lot of other things. Voyager probably being the thing that he's most well known for, although obviously he's worked on the Wonder Years. He's working on a little film called Inner Space, and my personal favorite, of course, is his work on China Beach as Captain Dick Richard.
He's a television legend, really.
Yeah. And it's important to note that he was also in the Stargate franchise playing a little character named Richard Woolsey. So there's definitely an
interesting. I didn't want
and Martin Garrow. Stargate. Yeah, Martin Garrow, of course, was the executive producer on Stargate Atlantis.
That's not a coincidence at all. No.
I mean, I think we got our first Stargate Quantum Leap crossover right there. That this could have been his character's father or grandfather. I'm not completely clear on the ages of the characters in Stargate Atlantis. I've only seen a couple episodes, but anyway. Yeah, and right away, I mean, we're introduced to all of these different faces. Mike Wade, who plays Mo the janitor, Heidi Kwan, who plays Mallory, or any other name that, of course.
What a great detail to show! Like, what a great piece of dialogue behavior to show a character, right? Like,
right.
He never gets her name right.
No,
never gets her name right, and when he called her Valerie, I was like, oh, not even close, man. Wow.
Right.
I love little things like that, like, we don't get to meet these characters for that long. I mean, obviously we see them for, the whole time, but we're only getting to know them in supposedly 30-minute chunks, right? Because the main thing happens in 30 minutes, I believe is what Addison says, right? But anyway, I love little details like that because it tells you exactly who that person is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love too that in this particular episode, we also get to not only see the events from, Ben's perspective on each of these characters, but then Ben's perspective as each of these characters and the impact that has, as we kind of learn a little bit more about them. We also meet Joe DeNickel, who plays Eugene. And Joe was on a number of episodes of Blind Spot, which of course is a show that Martin Garrow had created and worked on before. We have Matthew Glave, who of course is Glenn Gulia from The Wedding Singer, amongst many other things.
That's the thing, right? I didn't recognize him from that until you brought up off mic. I know him as the ex-husband from oh my God, I was just going to call it Stranger Things, and it's not. But the Pamela Adlon show that all of a sudden I've now completely gone out of my brain. There's always going to be one time in an episode where Lauren just forgets something.
Oh,
so here it is.
Welcome to Fate's Wide Wheel.
Yes,
right.
But I had his IMDb up, but
she
played. Yeah, and I loved the show. And I'm sorry, Pamela, I've forgotten the name of your show. Anyway, played the ex-husband in that.
Yeah, the only thing I have seen
Better Things.
Thank you. I was like, Stranger Things? That's not correct. Better Things.
But the only thing I've seen him in is The Wedding Singer. So I'm sitting there like, it was like halfway through, like there was a certain angle. I was like, oh, I know that guy. And I was like, I know he was a jerk and he was something out of the 80s or the 90s or something out of the 80s or the 90s. And I'm right on both.
Right. Yeah.
Well, he was also a jerk on Better Things. And I was like, I feel like he plays these kind of characters really well, but I recognized him right away. I mean, he's a journeyman actor. I mean, his IMDb is insane. He's been on everything.
Right.
He is that guy.
Yeah. And he's, and again, like you said, he's done so much. I mean, there's so many television shows, that you could just kind of throw a dart at the dartboard and you land on one. So I'm not going to go into, his full credits or anything like that, but it's great because we have this wonderful little ensemble here of actors that, I think we have varying degrees of exposure to them. And that's true also of the nature of The Leap, in that we don't necessarily get a lot of information about any one of these characters, but I definitely feel like we get enough information about each of them to care, which is really nice.
I will say if you pause the screen while they're reading their obituaries, those obituaries are actually in very good detail.
They are. I noticed that on my second watch.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yet another reason to rewatch this episode. And I'm going to take a small detour here real quick. It was announced today that Peacock has exceeded expectations in subscribers with having over 20 million subscribers. And I certainly don't want to, pat the show that we love so dearly on the back too hard, but I will say that the fact that it is, number one amongst all of the new series for this season on there, and that it was like the number 2 stream show for a few weeks there or whatever, and is certainly like within the top 5. I mean, it's clear that things like that are going to bear a lot of weight in the continuing success of the show, and again, it's one of the reasons why we got the early second season renewal, and my hope is that can just kind of continue, that to not only help the show, but the show can also help to benefit that streaming service. Because I think that one of the things that Peacock has done so well is that they unlike Netflix, which has just tried to throw so much content out there and just try and keep people engaged at every turn. I feel like Peacock has been really smart in having shows slowly roll out, and especially the new shows, the continuations or the reimaginings or whatever, like Saved by the Bell and Fresh Prince, and now you've got a show like Poker Face, which is getting a lot of buzz and a lot of acclaim, and I think that over the course of the past couple of years, you look at the new shows that they've put directly on the service, then you look at the shows that NBC is actually producing that are of course also on the service, and I think that they've really been able to strike a good level of content generation and also kind of, for lack of a better word, regurgitation, whereas a lot of other streaming services I don't think have really captured that quite as well. I think Paramount Plus is close, but if I'm being completely honest, I gotta say that like HBO Max and Netflix are kind of getting left in the dust a little bit by NBC and Paramount as far as I'm concerned right now.
Yeah, well, that's a whole discussion, right? Because HBO is the whole Warner Brothers merger is a lot about the bottom line there, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I think Netflix probably has the issue where they are the oldest one out there at the moment. And they not maybe not used to having competition,
Right.
you know.
And
But
And look, I think that Disney is probably, I mean, Disney probably sits at a level above all of them. I mean, with what they're doing, especially with the Marvel shows, the Star Wars shows, and of course their own content. But yeah, it's interesting. It is a bigger discussion to be had. It's one that I didn't mean to necessarily jump us off into, but I thought it was worth at least noting that Peacock has surpassed expectations at this point, and I think that there's a good chance that Quantum Leap had a little something to do with that.
I became a subscriber to Peacock off of that. Like, I'm recording off live TV with Hulu, but I was like, I want to be able to go back and watch these episodes without the commercials. So I subscribed to Peacock just for that.
There you go. But anyway, jumping back into the episode, we get I just think some strong vibes from the where we are when we are right away, of course, using the famous Kennedy speech, setting us right in September of 1962. I had the date pulled up, now I can't remember it, and I should remember it because
that's the interesting thing about Kennedy, right?
September 12th.
Because he was in office for such a small amount of time, if you know history, you can pinpoint where you are so specifically. And that's one thing that I also loved about the episode was I think both shows in general always work best when the audience is the same as Ben or Sam's eye, right? Like, we're learning as he's learning, which is why it's a great device to begin with, that he doesn't have a good memory, right? But to see him sort of pop in, and then you get like, oh, he's called by his rank. Okay, so he gets at his rank and he looks up and sees the uniform and who he is, and then gets all the information, and we are also absorbing all of that same information, comes into the I don't know why I was going to call it an office, but it's late in New York. I'm so sorry, everyone who's listening. The control room, thank you. And then we see all the clues, and then we're absorbing it at the same time as Ben is, and I thought that this was an example of how the show does that really well, because I was there for the whole journey of learning, because even I was like, okay, so this is between 1961 and November 1963 at some point.
Yeah,
because I didn't know exactly when that speech was. I know they kept saying it was famous, but I was like, I don't know when that speech was. I know it was a speech, but I don't know when it was.
So I have a question I want to pose in relation to that speech and the events of the episode. So in the original history, Kennedy gives this inspirational speech, and then surely he has to be told that this nuclear reactor in Fort Worth had an explosion. Do you think Kennedy knew, or even he had a say in doing the cover-up? He just gave this inspirational speech, and this shit happens.
I mean, there's two ways to go with this. One, government cover-ups quite often are not Nixon-like and happen on sub-level, right? And there's no reason to let the president know about that.
Absolutely.
Plausible deniability.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think in that time period, that kind of thing he'd probably be okay with it. I mean, there's a lot of things that Kennedy did that were not, above board in his own personal life. So who the hell knows? But I feel like, isn't that the speech, though, that it was about going to the moon, right? So it's about
we choose
innovation.
to go to the moon.
Yes. So yes, but I think that they were on such a trajectory to get to the moon before the Russians, right? That I think that he wouldn't care. I mean, is that what you're saying? Is that, oh no, about the cover-up though, about if he wouldn't care? Well, I don't know. That's a speculation I didn't think about.
One of the things, I mean, I love that notion, but one of the things that I think is amazing about using that speech is that it's not, they don't hit you over the head with it. It's not like we listen to the whole speech. They don't even play the famous line. We don't even hear, we choose to go to the moon, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. Like, we don't even hear that section of the speech. But the thing that's kind of amazing and incredible about it is it helps to contextualize so much of this episode, and in particular technology, and what technology means for, you know, for our own accomplishments, you know, and if the history of humanity is hung on this timeline of like discovery and accomplishment, right? Like if we go with that notion, that this particular period in time in 1962 was incredibly important to that. And also 60 years from now, because of the work that Ben is doing, if you look at it, like that's incredibly important. Like he even talks about, you know, at the end of the episode, he's like, you know, we're going to travel through time one day. And I think within the context of this world, like time travel is a real thing. It is a real scientific accomplishment that is sitting right alongside going to the moon. The interesting thing about that is that if you look at the fact that, yes, at this particular point in 1962, we're behind the Russians, well behind the Russians. It's something that Kennedy even said in his speech, which I think is another thing, like to show that kind of vulnerability and that kind of honesty in this big speech that he's giving, and just being saying like, yeah, look, we're really behind. We didn't have the first man in space, you know, but you know what we're going to do? We're going to put somebody on the moon. And I think that it's that intersection of idealism and technological advancement and what that can do. And yet look at where we are now with the space program. Like, what is it, right? What did we really do? And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to, you know, poo-poo the achievement of going to the moon. I think it's still one of the most wonderful things that humanity has ever accomplished. But I think that the idea being that this technology, all of this advancement, all of this innovation, you know, what did it really end up getting us in the long run, especially with where we are right now? You know what I mean? Right now, nobody seems to care at all about that, which is sad and maddening. But so the fascinating thing to me is, and plus it's also the idea that this was something that happened after he died, after Kennedy died, right? This was something that he never got to see. And so I just think that there's so much about what this episode represents, and also what it branches out and represents for the series, that it's an interesting piece of context to have that speech play, you know, part of it, and to have that be kind of our background, that this is September 12th, 1962, the day that Kennedy gives this speech. You know, that in one of the leaps during the loop, Ben even kind of like makes everybody watch the speech so he can go and try and, you know, figure out what's going on. And so I just can't help but wonder, given the fear and apprehension that Ben has by the end of this episode over what they've created, what they're doing, and what that might mean. I think that it first of all, it plays into the themes that have been well established in the previous episodes, that we know, we've always known. I mean, we've talked about it before in the show, that technology and you know, is it good, is it bad, where, you know, where do the good sides and bad sides of technology meet? You know, can the ideal end up supporting the technology, or will eventually it fall into the wrong hands, as is kind of, you know, hinted at in this episode. So I just think it's actually a really wonderful thing to help set us up. And it's also a great reminder of how richly layered the show has become. And I would say, you know, I mean, really has been almost since day one, you know, I mean, especially by the time we got to episode 3, the layers upon layers upon layers that they're heaping on the show, when it could have just easily been a pulpy sci-fi rehash, you know, of an old show on television. Instead, they're crafting this really fine piece of work, and they're layering in so many different thematic elements that, yes, you can just sit back and watch it and enjoy it, but if you dig a little deeper, there's so much more at play. And I think that this is a wonderful example of that.
Absolutely.
Well, I think it's also very interesting, just piggybacking off of what you said, is that to have a revival be about consequences, right? Because it is the aftermath. Like, I know I mentioned last time I was on just about the fact that, you know, some people were a little unhappy that it felt like Al's happy ending was sort of, you know, upended. But that's what happens when you have a revival, because the story is continuing and you need conflict for a story, which means that this is a show about consequences, right? So, and about ghosts, which go into a little later, right? You know, ghosts of the past and ghosts of the future, perhaps, right? And so I think you're right. I think that this is in the early 60s, not just for the speech, but like Addison says, everyone was optimistic, right? But even those who were part of the Manhattan Project regretted it afterwards. Einstein regretted it afterwards. You have these sort of lofty ideas because you want to do good things. You want to make the world a better place.
Absolutely.
Love that little line. That was great, because you believe you are the hero of your own story. It doesn't mean, I mean, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? That's always the villain story. But also there's that gray matter in between of you're not really the villain, but you're not really the hero. You just either stumble along the way or you make choices that you thought were good at the time that have consequences, which is what Janice is talking about in the previous episode. Is that if you say anything out loud when time travel exists, anyone at the Future Project, anyone anywhere can somehow find that information either from another person in the future or from Ziggy. And so no one can be trusted. And I was hoping that they would go here, and it makes me very, not that I wasn't very excited, but I'm really excited to see where it goes, because yes, this episode seems to imply, as we already sort of were hinted at, that this is about the future of this project. What happens when it gets into wrong hands? I mean, I think a lot of people came up with this independently through the years, but I know I always thought that the evil Leapers were probably part of a government project that eventually just went wrong, who knows how far in the future it was. We also know the US government doesn't have the best intentions. Any government doesn't always have the best intentions. I mean, as much as Magic wants to find Sam, for example, I believe that he's keeping it secret because that is not what the government wants. The government most likely does not want to pay millions and millions of dollars for a search and rescue of one man. They want a working time travel machine.
Sure.
But what are they going to do with that is the question. So I think basing the first season's mystery on something that has to do with consequences is fascinating.
Absolutely. And I think, I can't remember, we mentioned this in a previous episode, it was never said on screen in the original series, but in a script, they definitively put the Evil Leaper Project in 2020.
They did not.
Yeah. So I'm really interested to know, are they going to hold true to that? And is Lothos
actually Ziggy
somewhere that or somewhere out there? I have a feeling that probably not, because that would get too sticky. But
yeah, I hope not. But who's to say who is Ziggy without her ego? Is she just another number cruncher, as Sam says, or is she Ziggy? And I'm not sure she's Ziggy.
Ian has some wonderful dialogue about Ziggy in this episode. And
yes, we got a lot of tech drops in this one.
Yeah. And I think the idea that, Ziggy isn't all knowing, that Ziggy can only operate based off of the information that Ziggy has at the time. And I'm avoiding using any pronouns right now. And the main reason why is because without that ego, like you said, what is Ziggy? Who is Ziggy? And I think that, if Ian is the one that kind of interfaces the most with Ziggy right now, and they're, kind of spitting this knowledge at everybody about what Ziggy's capable of or not capable of, I think that it certainly indicates to me that there will be more of that in the future. And that's the other thing. I think that, the expectations of some viewers going into the show to have Ziggy be what Ziggy was in the original series right off the bat, I'm really enjoying the fact that we've gotten to take our time with certain things, certain elements of the story, of the canon, of what we're seeing at work at the project compared to maybe what we saw 30 years ago, because there's so many other stuff that has been moving, so much other stuff that's been moving at a really fine pace, especially when it comes to the relationships of the characters and Ben and Addison's relationship and just the journey that he's on and trying to figure out what's at play there. But again, the show is so richly layered that all of that other stuff, all these questions that people have been asking, all of these things that people have been expressing frustration or disappointment over, which, I'm not one of them, they're being addressed. Each and every piece of it's being addressed, and it's really, I don't know, I think it's great, and I think it leads me to believe that there's so much more at play. And I think with a little bit of patience, a lot of people that maybe weren't necessarily on board in the beginning are going to have to kind of sit there and sort of like eat crow, because it's like, well, that's not the story we're telling right now. We're going to get there. and even if it's not to their satisfaction, right? Like, I still think there's just more going on than what some people might think.
I think you're right. And I think I forget if I mentioned this on your show before, but the other problem with Ziggy talking is that I'm sorry, I'm going to say it. Because what I also wanted to say was when I say she, I may past tense she. So Ziggy present tense it is a literal des machina. Like, Ziggy could come in and say, oh, well, when Ben and Janice were here, they were doing this. And so that's why they're doing it. And this is what the code needs. So unfortunately, when Ziggy can talk, you don't have a mystery. And so I understand for story reasons why Ziggy can't talk. And I'm starting to wonder if it will. And maybe that's just not who they are anymore. That's a whole other story. I don't want to disappoint people. I don't,
I mean, I know, because it's like, once they open that Pandora's box, you can't put it back in.
Exactly. You can't.
Right. And for all of the points, and I never really thought about it, but yeah, because like once Ziggy starts talking, it is able to just unravel the mystery. And that just
and we can't have that yet. It's
although
just not...
I will say that the precedent that seems to be set in this episode, which is really nice, which might actually pave the way for them being able to, if that's even in the cards, which I don't know that it is. I'm leaning towards like what you guys are saying, that it's probably not. But if they do decide to give Ziggy a voice at some point, hopefully, the voice that we all want to hear, we've had the president establish that Ziggy has to be fed certain information, that Ziggy is not all knowing, that this concept that Ziggy just knows everything, which I see a lot in Reddit posts. I see a lot of people in Reddit posts saying like, well,
that's not the impression I ever got.
Exactly. And so
I don't know where people are getting that.
Like, but the thing is it's like the idea that Ziggy is not all knowing, that Ziggy has to be fed information. It could lead to the opportunity again for just some interesting conversations to occur, right, between this AI and our characters. So again, I think if it gets explored, awesome. If not, I'm fine with that too. But I just think that there's some nice groundwork that has been laid so that if they do it, it can be done in a way that Ziggy does not have to be all knowing, that Ziggy does not have to figure everything out, that there can actually perhaps be a dialogue between the AI and the characters in order to actually discover some of these things and to do some of these investigations in tandem, as opposed to having, the Deus Ex Machina, which is just sort of like, here, I'm going to save the day. This is what you're here to do. It's over with. So I think there's some interesting potential there.
Oh yeah, I think there's definitely potential, because Ziggy is always going to come from a non-emotional point of view, and the people at the project are always going to be emotional. Now, in a lot of situations, being emotional can detach you from the facts. But sometimes being emotional is what helps you figure out what's actually happening. So I think that dichotomy is interesting. A great example for me was I've been doing my family tree and I couldn't find my grandmother, because I was sticking to emotionally stories I had been told. And then I got someone from the outside who didn't know my family, just went, well, have you tried this name? Oh no, that's not her maiden name. It's not. It is. The story my dad assumed or told was not true, but emotionally, I could not let go of those stories when I was doing my research. I needed someone from the outside who had no emotional, experience with my family to go, oh, you should try this.
Yeah.
And then I found my grandmother.
Well, I think that's another thing that this episode does really well too, is to play with that idea that, a certain level of detachment could perhaps allow for judgment that the other characters don't have. And we see that in Janice, whereas the other characters their emotional involvement make the stakes so high that they're unable to move forward in certain areas, whereas Janice is, and of course, conveniently, Janice is also the one that wrote the paper on the time loops that they need in order to feed Ziggy to discover stuff.
That.
I thought it was great too.
I love that.
So yeah, I love that idea, and I think that again it plays into a lot of the themes that they're exploring, especially with found family, with trauma, with grief, with ghosts, with consequences, and of course then with technology. And ultimately Ziggy represents a piece of that technology that may be harmful in the wrong hands.
That's the thing. Like, it's very plausible to me that Al stole the ego and kept it somewhere, which means that Janice would also not want Ziggy's ego to get into government hands, because what would they do with Ziggy after the project was done? Yeah. Right. I see sometimes online people talking about like, well, what did the government want for the original project? Why did Al and Sam want to do it? I think that, like you say about the moon, or any adventure, like we're going not because we can, because it's there, right? I think it's a lot about that, but you could think that maybe they all did not think of the consequences, right? That now they have no time travel project, they have no Sam, Al is left to take the tech perhaps for their own use to be able to, continue, but also just because this tech should not end up in government hands. What are they going to do with it? So in that sense, I know for a while we started to think, oh, Janice is going to come in and be like, here's the ego.
Right.
I had it the whole time, but now seeing the show and the layers that they are, adding to the story, I don't think she's going to give it up.
Right.
No. While we're on Janice, I want to ask, with the conversation that Jen and Magic have later on, which just emotionally, I just love that scene so much for so many reasons. Do we think they are setting it up to make Janice a series regular?
I think they are.
I hope so.
I really.
Please make her a series regular, NBC.
I mean,
It's White Whale is begging you.
I am begging you. Even if she's not a series regular, a semi, like, because contracts are, budgets, things like that, right? But somehow be more recurring or be a series regular. It's starting to seem that way, because that was a pretty large drop to then ignore, I think. But I really would hope that what would be interesting to me is that if in a season 2 or a season 3, we find out that the reason that Beth wanted her off the project is not what we really thought it was, that there maybe is a danger, because that's very like Pat. Okay, well, now you're on the project, blah, blah, blah. Which, listen, is fine. It's not a big part of the show, but I think it would be interesting if we find out that there is consequences, the theme of the day, to Janice being on that project, and anything from it may endanger her existence somehow, or just she finds out information that Beth doesn't want her to find out. Because we've all talked about that. It would be really fascinating at some point to see a character, whether it's Janice, whether it's one of her sisters, whether it's somebody else, to process the knowledge. I used to not be here.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, how heady is that? How do you process that? I think the show always does well, and has done well, when we are with the people in the present, to connect it to a leap in some way, but also a time travel predicament that also mirrors something in life, right? Magic talks about, if only we could go back and change things, right? Which I don't think he's saying it ironically. I think that he really means it, right? Because I don't think that Magic is the kind of person who would think he could change his own life. I'm not quite sure yet. I think we'll see if they believe that Sam was there to only save his brother, or saving his brother just happened to be a, not consequence, but an aftermath. He just happened to be there and he saved everyone, including his brother, right?
Yeah.
Because there were already files of other episodes that no one's mentioning, like an evil leaper. Like it feels to me like they don't have access to any of that information, which sounds dangerous. So I'm sort of going off on a tangent, but I
no,
think,
have you listened to our show?
The sign on the door.
I found that scene with Jen also very interesting, because I think that, and maybe it's the way that Ernie's playing it, that I don't feel that it's like, oh, well, we could go back, hit, we have time travel. I don't think he thinks that he can do that. So what if he finds out that Al and Sam significantly changed their lives, right? Which I'm sure that the project is not supposed to do. I know we haven't been told it, but I'm sure it's a rule that is probably still, something within the project. How could you not, right? Because then people would always use it for their own use. It's different to know, like, oh, my life was saved because of this person. But what if you find out, hey, how come they got to do it? To change their life. Can I change my life?
Yeah. Before we move on, Sam, I want to take your point, but before we move on from that scene, I want to point out the reason why I love that scene from a writing perspective is that there's a moment where Magic and Jen repeat themselves. Magic says, every decision I make, I have to take on myself. And Jen says, we're all affected by that too, to paraphrase it. and they come back and they say that a minute later, and that's how arguments work in real life. And in that small way, that feels like one of the most real emotional moments in the series so far.
Well, it's also a part of the show in general. Like, in the leap, we have, your life matters, what you do with it matters, which is like, that's Quantum Leap. Your choices need to be specific, and your choices, you have free will, and your choices are what predicts your future, right? And that, there's a thing about, some people will say, well, I didn't make a choice. Well, that is a choice, right? Like even just standing still and not giving yourself a choice is a choice. And then you don't have any choice in, you don't have a choice in the matter of your own life because you didn't do anything. You just stood still. And so life made the choice for you. And I think that those two moments from the leap and from that scene with Jen and Magic is what Quantum Leap is. We are only our own choices and we can go back. But if you could, what would you do?
Yeah.
And yeah, that's why I love the show. Because even though it's a fun time travel show, because I love time travel, but it's really at the core about how you should act as a human being. The little things you do in people's lives are important. The way that you live your life and the choices that you make are important. You are important. And to just sort of blindly go through life and only think about yourself and not others, or think that you aren't important to have a place in the changing of time is untrue. We were all small cogs in the time stream, so to speak, but we were all equally important, and the small things we do can change people's lives and can change our own life. And I think that's why I really love it and why I loved the finale so much. I always love to put that out there. But yeah, so I appreciated that, they're not that I thought that they weren't, but the sort of common core themes of Quantum Leap are in this episode.
Sure.
Well, and I think too that one of the things that interests me is the idea of changing things for yourself or for others around you, and that for Magic it's not an option. I feel like for a lot of these characters, change, if they were to like actually go and change something or get the opportunity to, they wouldn't do it. It's like the idea that Al never would have thought to try to get him and Beth together unless the opportunity just presented itself the way that it did. And afterwards, we never saw Al say, Sam, you should do this for me. Quite the contrary. He actually used it against Sam and said like, hey, we couldn't change that for me. We can't change this for you. Now, obviously, Sam ended up getting the opportunity to do it anyway. But I think that it's the difference between certain characters and certain situations that they find themselves in. And I think that like without saying too much, like there's an episode coming that will absolutely involve the opportunity to change things in a very personal way for someone. And I think that the way that the show is going to handle that might surprise some people actually. And I think too that like those scenes, the scenes between Magic and Jen, the scene between Magic and Addison, are so wonderfully written and performed. I mean, just absolute. I mean, the work that Ernie does like this week is just worth the price of admission alone. I think he's just fantastic. I think Nanrissa just continues, like Jen just continues to be this awesome character that I just want more of, and I know we're going to get that, and I can't wait until we do. And the stuff with Ian and Janice is great as well. But that that scene specifically with Jen and Magic, it's really all about one thing, and it's family, and it's found family. It's the idea that the most important thing to these people is one another, that there's not necessarily someone at this point that they're going home to. We've already had the hints that Magic has screwed some things up in his own family life, right? We know that none of these other people seem to have significant others that are important to them or families that are important to them. Jen's relationship with her father is not great. Addison's relationship with her parents is complicated. We don't have a lot of information about Ian's family, but I can certainly imagine that there's not necessarily, there's certainly potential there for not great, relationships there. So I think that that raises the stakes. And it also, again, is a wonderful callback to the classic series, because of course, one of the most important thing, I mean, if not the most important thing, it was family, and it was the found family. It was the found family between Sam and Al, and the importance of that, and that the last gift that Sam basically gave to Al was a real family, right?
Yeah.
So I think that element of the show, and the idea that Janice is kind of currently an outsider. I mean, what is that Jen says, which I love so much? That's my family. Janice doesn't get a vote in that. I love that. The idea that for her, Jen still sees Janice as an outsider, even though later on she also says, like, maybe we'd be friends, if Janice had been on the project all
but
along.
She also, says, which I thought was, I mean, I get why she thinks that way, but I think it's a little uncalled for, was that she still thinks that Janice is using Ben as some pawn.
Right.
When it's so obvious that it's not Janice's idea.
Right.
It's, again, I will, defend Janice to the end of the earth, for reasons, but, I get why they're all angry, but they're directing it at the wrong person, right? They're directing it at Janice because she's the outsider.
She's the outsider.
Because she's there.
Because
as opposed to direct. I mean, you get why Addison is so angry, so angry. It's a betrayal, right? That went to this woman and not her. But it just seems like everything Janice is saying is going to come true, and sort of piggybacking, I guess, on what happened last week, right? Which I think leads into this week with Janice by telling them they're not thinking fourth dimensionally enough. I love that it's Janice who brings all that in, right? Because here is her father, who not just worked on all of this, who has all this information, but was very into conspiracy theories. And what is the biggest, feels like a conspiracy theory, but is actually real, is the idea that no matter what I say could affect something in the future that could then affect me now in the past, which is my present, because nothing is ever a secret when time travel exists. Like, that feels like something that she was taught by her father, which is why I really love that when they needed someone to know about time loops, that it was Janice, right? That it's like, see, told you that she was someone who was going to, be needed. And also, we didn't talk about with the scene with Ian. I'm not sure in that scene how much she's lying and how much she is telling the truth, because it's a lot of information that we've already gotten. Although I do love the confirmation that it was a dream that she had since she was a little girl, which is what we all had expected, which actually made me start to think, I think mostly because they're definitely pushing hard on Sam with magic as opposed to Sam with Janice. And Janice is really all about her father and not about Sam. Not that it isn't an afterthought, I'm sure. Finding Sam is her father's wish, so that would make him happy. But I'm starting to think that subconsciously it might have been more about, well, as a little girl who just wanted to spend time with her dad.
Yes.
And that's what her dad was doing, right? And again, I'm going off on a tangent. I got to find my way back. But anyway, so what I was trying to get at was, when she says, about wanting to do this since she was a little girl, and then she's, again, accused of poisoning her mom.
She had it coming.
She had it coming, right? But then she looks off. And listen, I don't know how much the actress is being given, and I know I've seen interviews and I don't think she knows, so maybe I'm reading into this, right? But they might have given her some things in advance. But she says that and kind of looks off, and I was like, are you lying about that? Are you trying to make them all think that you have this chip on your shoulder, that all you care about is, your father's legacy, when like it's bigger than that? Or am I reading too much into it? I don't know. But she looked off when she said it. Like, not melancholy, because when she talks about, I guess this is what it would have been like, which is when I went, oh, you just want to spend time with your dad. Yeah. Because she gets emotional and it's a little melancholy. I guess this is what it would be like. She's not excited about it because he's not there.
Yeah.
And so that was different than just, she deserved it and kind of looked off. But it could have just been, she's a wonderful actress and she's just playing the moment and being deceptive. Yeah. But I was curious about that. I don't know if you read that into her performance.
I don't know. Another moment I love in that scene is that Ian points out again that Janice poisoned her mom, or sedated her mom. And
she's like, it was a sedative.
Yeah, it's sedative.
Oh,
And that's come up before with Jen and Janice's scene from a couple episodes back. And I almost feel like that's like the writers like walking it back because like, oh, like once you poison, sedate, whatever, once you drug your mom,
I mean, I'm not happy about it.
some people are going to find you very irredeemable. So I feel like they have to like walk that back at every chance of going like, no, I had to do it. Do what I had to do. No, I just sedated her. No.
Yeah.
Well, I think
let
that
your 80-year-old mother fall to the ground.
that's
my big issue.
We talked about this a little bit before, but I just think that so much of this episode and so much of what you were saying, Lauren, reinforces the fact that Janice does have a chip on her shoulder, and Janice does carry a lot of resentment towards her mother. And I don't think that there's any, she's not lying about that. She's not trying to hide anything there. I think that she's literally just sort of like, that she kind of feels good about it. She kind of feels good about the fact that it was like, she had it coming, and I'm okay with the fact that I did that. Like, you can try and hold it against me, and Jen can try and hold it against me, and other people can try to hold it against me, but I had a good reason. And
family
that
is
stuff,
complicated.
family is complicated. And furthermore, in Janice's opinion, that stuff's hers. It's like Beth doesn't get to keep all of his things, like, let's face it, at the end of the day, Beth was the facilitator, and this was probably healthy for Al, but Janice doesn't see it that way yet. Beth facilitated Al getting away from all of that, right? Beth was probably his lifeline. Beth was probably the one that was able to keep him from really, truly, like, just working himself to death, just really, truly falling back into all of his old patterns, his bad patterns, and being able to say, like, come home, like, you've done everything you can. It's time to come home. Now, for all we know, that was maybe only a year or so before he died. Who knows? I'm not saying that happened years and years and years and years ago, but I do think that, that Beth was his lifeline in a lot of ways. And for Janice also still saw the sorrow. She saw the consequences. She saw the ghosts on Al's face. And so for Janice, this is about something bigger. This isn't just about getting Ben to save the day. This isn't just about, getting Sam back. This is about redeeming her father's biggest failure, because there's no doubt in my mind that that's how Al saw it, and that Janice has come to believe that that's the case. And so for her, this is about redeeming her father. This is about saying, like, he didn't fail. He left all of this, and I'm the only one that can use it the right way. And that's because she's probably got a big ego. I mean, we know she has a big ego. Clearly she has a big ego, and I think, and so I think that, like, the way that they've explored the character, the way that they've advanced to the character, and this is true, honestly, of all the characters, as far as I'm concerned, there is a trajectory there for her, and it is based on very real wants and desires, and it stems from a place of grief and mourning, and I think that that's a very real thing that a lot of these characters are feeling in one way or another. And Magic has those beautiful lines to Addison about grief not keeping a schedule, that it shows up when it wants to, that that for Addison, she's been grieving and mourning the loss of Ben since the night he stepped into the accelerator, which again is something we've talked about on the show, and now she has that moment of a very real possibility of him dying, which is also an incredible scene. And let's just talk for a minute about the tenderness that Ian shows to Addison in that moment, while also clearly they are absolutely devastated as well. And it's just a beautiful, it's a beautiful moment between the two of them. So, I think that, like, when it comes to the project, which I know we've talked a lot about already, and I don't want to give short shrift to the stuff happening in the Leap, but when it comes to the project, the thing that is wonderful about this episode is that the emotional stakes for all of our characters feel very high, that everyone is very high strung, and yet at the same time, what happens when that, those tensions rise, it creates conflict, and it creates it in such a way that it doesn't feel cheap, it doesn't feel unearned, it feels like a natural progression of where these characters are based off of the experiences of the past 11 episodes. And I love it. I think it's great. It doesn't feel manufactured at all. It feels like a byproduct of the situation that they find themselves in, which is real. I mean, that's how we react. I mean, let's face it, the people we end up arguing the most with are our families, right? You know, like just think about any relationship you've ever had. Think about, you know what I mean? Like the people that are closest to you, you often end up having the most disagreements with. So I think that is another great example of how important this found family is to the show, and how I think thematically that is something that is important to Quantum Leap on the whole. And it's interesting that looking back on the past, how little that actually plays into our leap, because these are very disparate characters that are kind of thrown together just by virtue of these circumstances. And yet their individual families are very important, right? You know, Colonel Parker's got a ballet recital for his daughter to get to. Mallory has a sister that transcribes all of her work, and she's clearly very close to. Mo's got a fiance he wants to get home to. You know, I think with Woolsey and Eugene, the project does seem to be kind of their life in a way, which is also a nice echo for our characters in the project. But anyway, I digress. I just think that this is the type of episode that you could kind of just hang your hat on when it comes to, you know, writing about this series. Like, this is the type of episode that you could just do a deep dive on, and come up with, you know, something pretty special, because I think it does typify the best qualities of the series as it stands in 2023, which is still wild to say.
Well, I think what we haven't talked about as well is the whole lore aspect, right, from the original series, of what being that close to an atomic detonation would be. I mean, maybe not a full detonation, blah, 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 blah.
And Janice is the one that brings that up.
Yes, and then also the whole lightning metaphor, because that's the only other thing that has, you know, lightning and a nuclear explosion would set a leap, which now we've proven both can do that.
Right.
And I thought there was going to be, like, they were going to reference it because Janice was there, and I actually was okay that they didn't. They didn't have to.
Oh yeah. Right,
They
exactly.
explained in the moment why it did, and then we know that it comes from, you know, a basis of something from the original series, and I love that.
Yeah. Dennis, what you got to say?
So here's an existential question I want to ask.
Oh, okay.
And I've thought about this. I know you're not so much into Next Generation, Lauren, but Cause and Effect as a time loop story. Groundhog.
I was very into Next Generation. I just have not watched it in 30 years.
Right. Okay, the other ones. That was it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Cause and Effect, Groundhog Day, the first season of Russian Doll.
That I have seen.
Yeah. So we know that our body holds on to trauma. Our cells hold on to trauma. If you are stuck in a time loop and you are violently dying every time, does your body hold on to that?
You mean Ben, right?
Yes.
Or do you mean, okay.
I mean, in general,
because I would say that Ben's the only one who technically is reliving it, right?
For time travelers stuck in a loop. Yes. Yeah.
Sure. I think that all the trauma that he is experiencing in other people's bodies, right, because it's superposition, is going to be trauma that he is going to experience. I think we've even seen what in Dreams, for example, in the original series, where Sam actually taps into even though he's not superpositioned, right, into the past trauma of the person that his life that he has leaped into, right? So I think it's perfectly easy to say that, yeah, of course, he's going to experience the same trauma. I actually, after this made me think of when Sam, for example, in Trilogy, died in the fire. We all said, oh, he leaped out right before. But did he? Are we saying that this is something that only happened because of the loop? Or do you get reset like a video game into the next body?
That's a really interesting question.
Because we didn't have, we weren't able to see, an EKG and lifeline of Sam, right? This is an updated technology. I mean, I think that this episode is hinting that it's the leap that's doing it. I mean, the loop that's doing it. Well, I guess it's not really a loop, right? It's a Rashomon thing. But that made me think. I was like, oh, is this what could happen to him in other leaps, or just this leap?
I don't know.
Well, there's a couple of things that I want to just add in real quick. That it's interesting to me that Ben cannot leap into the same person twice. Now, I don't take that to mean that he cannot leap into the same person twice, like at all. I just think it means that he cannot leap into the same person at the same time that he has already leaped into. Like you can't occupy that space like twice at the you can't have two Bens in there at once, basically. And I think that that's really interesting because I think it gives credence to a lot of that notion that he will carry those experiences forward with him, including those violent deaths, right? And it's interesting to me because once he realizes he's not going to actually die, he kind of just looks directly into it, right? He's just sort of like, here we go again.
What a performance.
Well, right? But real
comedy.
Quick, I just want to say
sorry.
That in spite of that, the comedy, like you're saying, in spite of the sense of humor that he shows throughout the course of the episode, even in his last moments on screen, he is clearly haunted by his experiences of this leap, beyond the leap itself, but also with the notion that technology in the wrong hands could be the end of all of us, right?
He's terrified.
He is haunted. And I think that pays a lot of credence to not only, again, that technology and the thematic elements of that have been played at the show for a while now, but also from the notion that he's basically experiencing each of these deaths, right, in some fashion. Now, I don't think he's being physically harmed in any way, but I do think that there is absolutely an existential kind of angst that has got to accompany that, especially after the first one.
Sure. I mean, the reason why I asked that question is I realize that every time loop story I've seen plays up like the comedy of it. And you have to do it because if you really think about it, because I disagree with you, Sam. I think he does violently experience the explosion and being burned to death every time.
He does say, I thought I died.
Maybe.
Yeah.
So he's a consciousness that something happened. I mean, maybe it's just the fireball coming towards him. You could say it's that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's a really good question. I'm not sure if the show answers that. I'm not sure it does.
And I don't think we really want to think too much about it.
Well, no, because of course, the other side of this is to think about the other people, right? Like basically those people are dying every time. That the people that Ben ends up saving, that the people that Ben ends up saving are not the same people that he first encounters in that leap, technically. Because those people end up dying at the end of that leap, and then Ben leaps in beforehand, right? So the people that existed from the time Ben leaped in until the time they died, those people cease to exist.
They start over.
Granted, from their perspective, from the perspective of the person in the elevator, right? They've got no clue, obviously, but there's still that real notion that in there, that those people in between Ben leaping in and the explosion, that portion of their existence is erased. It's the same notion as when Sam would go back in time and change something so that a child was never born, or that some, or that a bad guy got it. You know what I mean? That mobster now died. Everything that happened after, that person that existed after in the original timeline is kaput. And it's the same thing that when Ben resets, those people that existed, even for that short amount of time, that died in that initial leap, they never got the chance to exist.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I mean, it'll it'll screw with your head because it's hard to wrap around. But it's, I mean, that's one of the natures of time travel in general. It's something that, quite frankly, I've thought a great deal about between Quantum Leap and Doctor Who.
I'm fascinated by it. I am fascinated by that idea because small things make. I mean, that's what the show says, right? But small things can change everything. You delay someone for a moment and they don't meet the love of their life, and then 10 generations are gone, right? It's go ahead.
There's this brilliant episode of Doctor Who called Amy's Choice, and in the episode, she basically lives this life, right? And then has to make the choice to, in essence, kill herself. And it resets to the point before. So that Amy that existed for that amount of time, died. That existence was real. That happened. But now this Amy knows nothing about what this Amy experienced, and the Amy that lived here to here, gone. Right?
See, that's something that I would love for them to explore. And I think that because we have the project and we have all these characters, that there is room for that in the future.
Well, yeah, especially with Janice.
Well, like
because it's the
120%
opposite
with Janice.
right?
Right. It's the opposite. But Beth is an example of that. Magic is an example of that.
Yes.
Whether
yes.
which
right.
of them know what's going on or not. But yeah, like everything is going to completely change. I know what I was going to say, but on top of that, I think it's even more fascinating for people who we assume that Al being in the imaging chamber is why he saw the center change in front of him, right? So is that to say that if something drastically changed, and I'm not talking about the like 401 thing that Ian looks at, right? Like I understand how in the moment you can see something and know that it's changing because you're a part of that information, right? Who's to say how long after that it fades away and you don't remember that, you only remember the original history. There's a difference between the outside world or your life from 20 years ago changing, right? Would we say then if something catastrophic happened and Addison came out of the imaging chamber, would it be her and only Janice who noticed that things were changed? And what does that mean? Because in this kind of story, you have to have the person who knows it's been changed or else nothing can change back. Right. So there's such a potential for that, I think, in a season 2 or a season 3, because of what the consequences do if Janice wakes up one day and she doesn't have any sisters. What if you lost someone that you loved that everyone claims doesn't exist? Let alone just marrying someone else and having kids. Like, I think there's so much potential for that. That doesn't get explored in other time travel shows at all. Whereas if it was real life, would be like, these are the consequences of this life. Yeah, no, I would love to see that.
Yeah.
I feel like I started to drop off at this point, but in season 3 of The Flash, they explored that.
Oh, cool. I did not watch The Flash.
Where Barry goes back in time to change the events of his mom's death, and he changes broadly everybody's lives in the Arrowverse. So not just the Flash, but in the Arrow. I think over on the Arrow, someone's child changed from a son to a daughter or something like that. And like I said, I started to fall off at that point, but like, yeah, everyone was like pissed. Really.
Time travel.
Yeah,
right.
Sorry.
Well, and it's, you know, in the story that's based on in the comics Flashpoint, that it explores some of that as well. But again, the one thing that it fails to really, I mean, they touch back on this in other big like event crossovers or whatever. But the thing that the fallout from the event that that I think is just as important is the idea that timeline that Barry creates, it ceases to exist when he changes things back for the better, right? And it's oh, it was just in my head and I completely in the X-Men for the Age of Apocalypse, which is a very famous storyline in the comic books, that to me was one of the storylines that finally started to get it right and really implanted some of the stuff in my brain, because there are moments of that existential angst between the characters when they realize that if they go through with their plan, they will cease to have ever existed. Like their entire perspective on everything that happened will change and they will never have been. Like, we take it as a reader, as a fan, like it's like, oh, they're still around, they're just a little bit different now. And it's like, no, like you have to understand that iteration of that person is gone, right? And again, that's the thing that Quantum Leap, I mean, Dennis, we've talked about this a number of times when, doing fan wank or, getting our own headcanon together. But yeah, there's so many lives out there that Sam touched for the better, right? But there's a lot of people that, and that's the other thing that sometimes we don't think about. It's like when he wipes out these gangsters, right, and shoots them, takes them out with the shotgun or whatever. Yeah, they're bad guys, right? They're hitmen. They're sent to kill him and the lady that he's protecting or whatever. That's how we see it on the TV show. But let's think about this for a second, though. Those guys probably had like wives,
Sure.
mistresses.
I mean,
and children.
I mean, so like, succinctly,
well,
it was done in the Leap Home Part 2. When Al drops the information, Lisa doesn't marry No-Nos. She doesn't marry you, but at least she doesn't marry No-Nos and have a couple of bulldogs.
Right.
Bye, kids.
Those kids are
That's
gone.
it. That's it right there.
Yeah.
But I think that it's touched on in the final season, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's called Nowhere to Run, when Al is like, you need to make sure this couple stays together because their kid is going to save a kid in Afghanistan, right?
Right.
So like that's an example of it, right? So they did touch on it. Ends up being the wrong couple, which is a great reveal, right? But that's a part of it, right? But also, do you become a different person, or is it like Doctor Who where Al can remember both timelines? Or do you slowly become your new person? And maybe you have a note that you wrote to yourself that says, you know, my life used to be different.
I mean, I've always taken it that Al can remember the differences. Now, that could be utter
I haven't.
bullshit, right? The main reason why is I just can't help but think like, how sad, right? And plus, like, how amazing.
I bet he can't remember his old
growth.
Life.
Right, like how amazing
That's
for
true.
the growth of that character.
Grew, right?
Because one of the things that really pissed me off, honestly, about the ending that we got, right, is Dr. Ruth. Because in Dr. Ruth, she helps Al accept the fact that he loves Tina, you know, and he's like, I love Tina. I'm going to be with Tina. And then a few episodes later, it's like, nah, screw Tina. He's meant to be with Beth. And don't get me wrong. I'm glad that he's with Beth. I'm glad that happened. But I just hate to think that like, that lesson would be erased, right? You know, that there wouldn't be the possibility for Al to like be walking, you know, the hallways of the project and see Tina with Gushy and just kind of be like, yeah, you know, and not in any sort of like weird, you know, sexual way, but just like in a, you know, in the idea of just kind of like, you know, things are as they should be, but there was a time, you know, she's pretty cool.
Well, see, I think that is interesting. And Doctor Who talks about how he can remember everything, right, at the same time, but obviously he is an alien.
Right.
The only thing for me is that I feel like, maybe not. No, I guess I sort of go towards the leap back, you know, where Sam says he slowly forgets the leaps and he can't remember everything. And I know it's not the exact same thing, but I tend to lean towards that you slowly start to forget and it merges. Because so what happens? Like one day Al walks out of the imaging chamber. Why can't I talk today? Al walks out of the imaging chamber and is just a different person to his family.
Right.
Because he's not. The person who went in to them was not that person because he had a completely different experience, had a completely different life.
And we never saw that Al.
We didn't, right? We didn't. We would hope that he would be kind of the same person, right? You know, but he would be a little different, which is, I think, in a modern society might have been a good idea. It's really too bad that we couldn't meet Al for many other reasons, you know. What a retcon for posterity that would be.
Yeah.
While still being himself, but not maybe as pervy.
So
I digress.
Here's the one thing I'll throw out real quick. Even though it's an episode that we have sometimes think should be decanonized for whatever that's worth, that it's dumb, but whatever. Lee Harvey Oswald, when Al tells Sam that Jackie died in the original history too, clearly he's not just reading that off of Ziggy's computer.
He is not. That is
he remembers that. Yeah. And that is at least an hour or so after the assassination attempt.
Oh, okay.
So he has had to retain that knowledge for that amount of time. And he's gone away and come back, right? Like he hasn't been with Sam the whole time. So he's stepped out of the imaging chamber and he's come back in. So that leads me to believe that he does retain it. Now maybe he only retains it for a couple of days, right? And it fades away after like a week.
I mean, because in the leap back, Sam, there's been hours have passed between, you know, being with Donna and then going to save Al, right? Like they have to upload all the information. I think in the original script, they had to charge the backup. So a number of hours have passed and he still says it's slowly fading away, right? Like he still remembers the leaps, but they're like faint memories. But yeah, I don't know. I would love to know. I think it's a fascinating idea and I'm fine with either any of these. And I would go, yeah, that's cool. They're all great ideas.
Right.
I still hold on that Lee Harvey Oswald should be decanonized. But anyway.
That ending though, I do love that ending. It's a pretty solid ending.
Here's the thing.
Don't like the episode though, but it's a very solid ending.
This is a tangent, and here's why. I used to love the ending. It used to send chills up my spine. But what killed it for me a couple years ago was Don Belisario did an interview with something online. And do you know how he came to the ending of Jackie being killed too?
Oh no, why?
He had to have Sam there to change something. That was
It was
it.
an afterthought.
There was no bear thought. It was just it was literally an afterthought.
And he had
I gotta have
an
Sam
axe
there to
to
change
grind.
something. Yeah.
Well, yes,
He had
that's
an
why
axe
I
to grind
don't.
with conspiracy.
That's why I don't
Yeah,
enjoy the
ugh.
episode, because it's not cohesive to me. It's
And the
not
thing is,
anything.
like, Scott is amazing. Dean is
Oh,
amazing.
yeah.
Like Scott
Just
does, honestly, Scott probably does some of
yeah.
his best work. Like, no
Yeah.
doubt. But yeah, it's just not for me.
Yeah. I mean, like the Elvis episode, terrible, but man, Scott as Elvis singing is damn good.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, you know, it is what it is. It should have
Yeah.
also should have been an hour and not 2 hours. But
So to back up and
Right.
go to the episode.
yeah, we're not talking.
Yeah, let's
talk
do it.
about
So
this
upon the
show.
second, so things of like kind of tangential, like not forgetting or like remembering the original thing or whatever. This is something I caught on second viewing, and
Mhm.
I want to know if you all caught it. I'm sure you're all smarter than me. You must have caught it. But every time Mallory comes out of the elevator at the beginning of the leap, she gives a different exclamation. The first time it's far out. The second time it's groovy. The last time it's neat.
I didn't catch the
I'll
neat.
be
I
damned.
caught the far out and groovy because I wrote it down, but I didn't remember it. But I see it in my notes. That's interesting because far out and groovy, I looked up, are particularly jazz terms, originally from the 1920s, because it
Mhm.
felt very mid 60s to me. And I was like, wait a second, but I love entomology. And I was like, maybe it just was like not in the huge vernacular then.
Mhm.
But I didn't catch the neat part. Interesting. Yeah, huh. A
And
little anomaly.
And every time she gets a little less excited.
I didn't notice that.
Almost like subconsciously they know that they're experiencing it again. And it's a little
One of my favorite parts is when Ben's like, yeah, comic book. Yeah.
I know, yeah, right. Yeah.
Like, I'm so done with this. Can we just get on with it?
The wonderful thing is it fits too, because at that point he's Woolsey and like, you know, he's talking to Mo, and so it works perfectly. Yeah, it's interesting the way that each iteration does play out. And let's you know, flip things around for a minute here and just explore something else, because I don't want to lock myself into thinking one thing. What you mentioned, Dennis, about the possibility that these characters have some sort of faint recollection of each, you know, potential timeline is interesting to me, in so much as like there is certainly something to be said for the idea that it is not, you know, looking at it as a loop is incorrect, as we learn later in the episode, right?
Mhm.
And looking at it as though these are parallel timelines might also be incorrect. That this is just one single forward moving line, and that every time Ben resets, from his perspective, it's the past again. But from time's perspective, it's still moving forward. And so that these characters are able to kind of like recognize the echo of you know, what has for them come before, but that it's still just going in this linear fashion.
So like so more like a Mobius strip, where it's, you don't know where it ends, and you don't, well, that is a loop. What am I saying?
Well,
but like that, I guess when, for some reason, when you talked about that, I thought of a cassette tape. That, you know, you're rewinding it, but it's still moving forward in a way. I guess that's why I thought of a Mobius strip, which is just a loop. But so, yeah, interesting.
I thought of the
explanation. I never thought of it that way.
I thought the explanation, like the loop is not a loop, was a bit confusing to me. It seemed like it was a loop. You just had a finite number of times you could go through it.
Well, I think the idea is that, like what Ben says, right? He goes, it's not Groundhog's Day, it's Rashomon. And the Rashomon, and he goes, I just need to find out different points of view. And so the Rashomon, the movie, but if you look at it, people who haven't seen the movie, the Rashomon effect is the idea that you're seeing things from different perspectives, which is also why it makes it interesting that the last leap is the person who's the bottom of the totem pole, and that is where he gets the most information. You know, it's not the person at the top. It's not Robert Picardo. It's the janitor, where he gets the most. The lowest status person has the most information because they can go around undetected. Like that's a statement, right? As it is. I think that that's important, right? But he's obviously, from each different point of view, able to get different, you know, collect different information. But if he didn't have all of those different points of view, he wouldn't have been able to save everybody. So I think that's what they were trying to say. And I guess what I'm trying to say myself is it made sense to me, but I particularly really love the way that it's the information is deposited in the script, because you want to obviously keep building tension. And so the fact that, Addison is like, oh, you can just keep doing this forever, okay, cool. But then in the middle of the episode to go, oh, wait, actually, we were wrong. It really built the tension to go, oh, no, there's more consequences to this. You keep adding the consequences on top of it.
It was a great twist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before that, did anybody expect that we were going to get a montage of just Ben going through multiple leaps?
Yep. Just trying new things every time. But what a wonderful way to accomplish this story, as opposed to doing that, because I think that it would have been fun, right? But it would not have led us to, the tension filled, back 15-20 minutes of the episode that we got. It would not have led to I think it would have sacrificed some of the layers, that I was talking about too, because there's so much at play here. I mean, you get, again, when it comes right down to it, not only do we have all this other stuff at play, but in very subtle manners, and maybe in some not so subtle manners, we get wonderful, and I say wonderful because it's indicative of the time and the place. And again, it's one of those things that the show, I think, can do so well. We get these wonderful examples of misogyny and racism. We get some incredible moments of that hierarchy of power, the establishment, kind of how the establishment looks, especially to an outsider. And in this case, it's kind of like Ben and Addison, although at the same time, they're drawing parallels between their project and this project. That sense of kind of like impending doom and dread, I think would have been completely lost if it would have just been about like Ben getting the chance to do this over and over and over again until he gets it right.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, there needs to be keep saying consequences and and tension, but if you could just keep doing it over and over again until he got it right, well, then what are the stakes?
Right.
Right. So it makes sense, but I think most shows would have just put that out at the beginning, right? And so the fact that it's sort of layered in so that as soon as we get comfortable, we're told, oh no, actually it's a step higher, I thought was really a depth's way of doing the storytelling, because it really keeps you engaged, but also makes you go, oh, okay, now we're really, we only have too many of these left, as opposed to, oh, we had all this infinite number.
But what I love about the reveal, and this is done a lot with like the editing and the way it's shot, the way it's directed, is that Addison breaks the news to Ben. They have this whole conversation, and then they cut back and they realize that everybody else in the control room was watching this entire conversation. There's some really great moments. The colonel is mid lighting a cigar. What the hell am I watching?
Well, those are some of my favorite moments with Ben, particularly because it shows off a really great comic performance, which I always enjoy. But those whole moments, just like, oh, just wait. Okay, here we go. All right. Yeah. All right. I loved those sort of two moments at the end when he just sort of leans into it. But yeah, I think at the beginning, some people had issues with people not being able to hear what they were talking about, which, like, sometimes people talk to themselves, or you're in front of them and you're not paying attention, but I get it. And so I do love what that moment.
I mean, the thing is it literally happens in the very first episode. They get caught. Ben gets caught talking to Addison in the first episode. No, I know. It's just one of those things where it's like, and there's so many other times where it's very subtle, it's done with the background characters kind of looking at Scots or whatever, but like, anyway.
A lot of these are major cities. Sorry, if someone's talking to themselves in New York, you're just gonna
walk on. Yeah, that's how it is in Chicago. I'm just gonna keep walking. I think that I don't know. I completely lost my thought. Dennis, you're doing a great job of setting us up. What else have you got?
I've been subtly holding my pen the entire. I love that Eugene was the second one that Ben leaped into. It was almost like we're going to eliminate him early, so it's not him. Yep. And I love that Ben is the one who inadvertently sets off the bomb in the second leap and doesn't even realize it.
I mean, honestly, that's another thing that makes the episode so great, and it's why it bears repeat watching, is that all of these breadcrumbs that we are left throughout the course of the episode, and how many of them turn out to be red herrings, right? From Woolsey winding his watch, like it's like, is that the transmitter, right? It's like once we
or
find
the
out there's a
clicking
bomb,
of the
like,
recorder, the light switches. I'm like paying
right?
attention to everything.
Yeah. And then of course that pin and the idea, and I love what it means too. And again, there's so much at play, and you wonder how much of it is foreshadowing, how much of it is a red herring, right? Because like even when Ben figures out, like, it's like, oh my God, like I did it too. Like I clicked the pin, like I was the villain, and the idea, it's like, is Ben the villain? It's like
telling us what we need to pay attention to on the show is that
right.
The villain may be the person that we least expect.
Right. Yeah, and I think that this might be a good time to go ahead and just throw this out there. But like, we get that wonderful moment between Addison and Janice at the very end, that cliffhanger moment where Janice is like, "I'm going to tell you who told Ben, the reason why Ben leaves." And so for me, like, the thing is like, whether or not Janice is going to tell the truth or not, I don't know. I'm on the fence, but I think that there's 4 possibilities of who does it. And I'm going to tell you in the order. I'm going to tell you in the order of possibility from highest to lowest. Okay.
I'm ready.
The highest possibility, Ben.
Yes.
Ben is the one that tells himself.
Ben doesn't trust a lot of people, right? Like, who would he trust?
Right.
Himself?
Number 2, and this is the one that's interesting. This is the one that I first said a few weeks back, I think, on the show. Well, no, it's been longer than that, but because of the hiatus and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, Martinez. That Martinez is the one that goes back and and tells Ben. 3, Ian. I'm just throwing that out there because it's just something that I've been thinking about, and certainly with the way, I think that when Janice says that she can't trust Ian, I think that might be the lie of the episode. I think Ian might be the one that they can trust the most. And I mean, everybody.
I don't think she really knows. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't count. There's more.
That's right. Please. There's one more, and I'm just going to throw this out there to appease everybody, and I give it like a 0.005% chance, and if I'm wrong, I'll celebrate the fact that I'm wrong. But sure, why not? I'd be a fool not to throw it out there. Sam. I don't think that that's the case at all. I don't think it makes sense with the narrative that they're telling. I don't think that I think that there is a place for Sam, a story to be told for Sam. I don't think that this is it. I don't think he's going to be involved at all in season 1, unless it's something at the very end of the finale that, leads us into season 2. Sure. But I might as well just include him on the list just for the hell of it. But that's my list. Those are the 4 people that I think it might be. I think the people that we can trust the least overall, not because they're bad people, not because they're villains, but because just like Ben, they unbeknownst to themselves, they're doing things that could potentially screw everything up, are Addison, Magic, and Jen. And I think that it goes back to what you said, Lauren, at the very beginning. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I think out of all of our characters, those 3 probably have the very best intentions of anyone on the project, with the exception possibly of Ben, but he's not really there anymore. So anyway, that's my spiel.
That's a very good list. I feel that, one, I don't have enough information yet, but I was leaning towards Leaper X for a while. But then when that happened, I felt, well, wait a second, Janice, you're not listening to your own advice. So I don't know if this is going to be a real name, or it's part of the plan, or it just seems to go against what she said last week.
Yeah.
And she is the most, I don't want to say duplicitous, because, well, she is, but in the end, we're going to find out that she was right the whole time, obviously, right? She's going to, it's a large scale thing, bigger than all of us, as Ben said, that they're saving. So I do wonder if it's maybe some other Leaper from the future that we don't know about, maybe a character we haven't met yet. But that really threw me for a loop, because I was like, it's got to be someone that she doesn't know yet, because if Janice just says it was Leaper X or it was Ben, how is Addison going to trust that information, right? Like, this sounds like a clue to a scavenger hunt. Here's the name of a person you've never heard of, go find them.
Which makes me think that you're right, that it's not going to be the real name, because I think instead it's going to be a name that gets Addison busy. right? That gets the team busy so that things can kind of keep proceeding as they should, because perhaps Janice is too concerned with them investigating too much at this point, right? So is it a red herring to send them on a wild goose chase in order to kind of get them off the track so that Ben can do what he needs to do and Janice can watch things proceed as normal? Because I think one of the reasons why Janice didn't want to help at first is because Janice thought, I can't interfere, because if I interfere, I'm getting in the way of things. And
You're
then I think
changing the timeline. Everything needs to go the way it needed to go. Yeah.
Right. And I think she starts to realize over the course of this episode that she's like, oh no, I am a player. I didn't think I was. I thought I was supposed to just go hang out in Bali or wherever the hell she was. Belize. Thank you. I was just supposed to go hang out in Belize and work on my tan, but actually, no, I'm supposed to be here and I'm supposed to be doing things. Or maybe she's just intoxicated by the fact that she's there. And like she says to Ian, it's like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be
people who trust her, right? She's not used to being seen as the people that we've met already. I'm sure in her profession, she's seen away as very smart and capable, right? So I should take that back a bit. But they seem to be implying that she's going off to some sort of jail, which is what I figured would happen at some point. So maybe she needs something set in motion that she now knows she can't do.
Right. And maybe she does tell the truth, right? Because if she tells the truth and it's Ben, what better way to put like Addison at ease, right? But the caveat being, you can't tell Ben, right? You can't tell Ben that he's the one that, that set all this in motion, because
I don't know, but how do you believe that, right? Like if it's a name you haven't heard of, then otherwise it sounds like she's just regurgitating the information that she knows, right? So I don't know how it is a more interesting choice, right? But I don't know how she shows Addison that makes her trustworthy.
Right. Here's a question. Here's a question for you guys. Will they show us what Janice tells Addison?
Here's the thing. I don't think they will. Because of contracts. They will have to pay Georgina more money if she's in the episode.
Well, we look. We know she's going to be in more episodes.
No, but I mean, like, you could be in the previously on and you get residuals. I'm just saying.
Right? No.
It's I don't know. If she's only contracted for a certain number of episodes, they may not want to waste her for a couple lines. That's all I mean.
Sure. A couple thoughts. Maybe we should start moving to wrap up here pretty soon.
Yeah.
But I was reminded in this episode earlier on of some dialogue between Ben and Addison. I can't remember what exactly the dialogue was, but it was a reminder that Addison and Ben came on this new project Quantum Leap after it was started.
Yeah.
Getting it restarted was Magic's baby. And I keep having to remind myself that Ben is not like Sam in the fact, like, Quantum Leap was Sam's baby.
Mm-hmm.
Ben was just, he may have been passionate about it, but he was just another scientist working on this project, and he was never supposed to have been the leaper. And that's important because something pushes him over the edge to get in the accelerator and leap, when that was never his desire at all.
One thing too that's very interesting to me is it does seem like, and it's the reason why I put Ian on my list, is I think that the only two people that seem to know anything about time travel and about, like, what Sam was doing and how this was all thought up are Ben and Ian. Like, it's clear that nobody else knows anything really about time. Like, Magic and Jen are just like, my brain hurts, and Addison is kind of like, she had a job to do, a mission to do, but that got thrown, that went a little caca, so now she's got to do this other thing. So I just feel like, I feel like Ian and Ben are like the two that know the most. Now there could be other
scientists, right? They're the two scientists,
Mm-hmm.
so it makes sense. But I also would say, which I think I mentioned in the last episode, is that I'm really wondering if we're going to find out that Ian has been reading all of the files that now they have access to because Magic gave them high security clearance.
Mm-hmm.
Because
sorry, go ahead.
Please. No, so I'm wondering.
Do you have something to say, or did you leave the oven on?
Just say it.
Let me piggyback real quick. How fascinating is it too that not only could Ian be reading all this, but they could also be listening in on everything that Addison and Ben are talking about? Because one of the things that's really cool that happens in this episode, and we learn earlier that that they can kind of see and hear what's going on in the leap. But one of the things that's cool in this episode that I loved is like when Addison tells Ben, "Oh, put the headphones on. I'll be able to hear anything you hear." I thought that was such a cool little piece of like quantum leap technology stuff. It
was very cool, and I think it would hopefully it confirms to me, because I was guessing that this is probably how it worked, is that it sounds to me like the brain waves, or I guess mesons and neurons, as like say in the old show, right, are instead of being connected through a human, Al, are connected through the accelerator and through Ziggy, which is why you can look at an image of the imaging chamber, right? Like, so I feel like that proved it, because if you can hear what someone is hearing, then you're inside their brain, so to speak, which also I guess makes sense why the computer can track all of the brain and the heart, right? Would be because you're connected to the brain, therefore you're connected to everything else. So I feel like that sort of confirms, which is interesting and a really great glow up of the technology, because I know some people don't want the technology to change, but it doesn't make any sense.
No, right.
30 years, of course it's going to change.
So speaking of that, this is the thing I wanted to, like, what did you all think of the explanation or the possible solution that I think Jen
brought up? Yes, I was just going to talk about this.
Oh,
yes,
I was like,
that Jen throws out of shutting off the accelerator and what that could
unplugging
do to
the
Ben.
accelerator.
Yeah. Because
I was not happy about that. I was like, do not do that, Jen. That sounds bad.
No, that sounds awful. And again, it was another place to just say like, hey, what if Ben gets lost like Sam got lost? And I think that, again, the parallels that they keep creating, obviously, which are obvious. I mean, I'm not saying anything groundbreaking here, but the parallels that they keep relating to us between, what happened to Sam and what could happen to Ben, I think it's wonderful, because that's the thing too. They're operating from a base of knowledge. Just because they're not spending every single episode talking about every little piece of minutia from the classic series in order to indicate that they know what happened, like, it's clear that they are operating from a base of knowledge about what happened on the prior project. Now, how much they know, we don't necessarily know yet, but I think we're going to learn more as the series progresses. So it's interesting to me that Jen would even bring that up, because it feels to me like the type of thing that he's gonna get lost. Like, that doesn't bring anybody home. Like, you can't unplug that.
That's how they lost Sam, right? Like, since they don't seem to have access to most information, or even very early on, the name Calavici only meant something to Ian. It didn't mean anything to anyone else, it seemed, right? They had to explain it, which goes into how they're projecting their characters. I think it's great, and being curious about the knowledge, maybe then reading the files. But like, why don't they know about evil leapers? Like, that seems like important information they should know. But I do agree, like, I'm fine. I don't need them to like make references to old episodes, like, oh, remember the file from this. Like, I don't need that. But it does feel like that there's some information that they don't have. So as far as they know, when the project ended, they unplugged it, and that's when they lost Sam, right? Like, they don't know. What I find interesting is there's a lot of tech drops in this, specifically about that. Addison, instead of saying the computer chooses, from like, I think that's from the pilot, right, says that the accelerator chooses. That's new information. Although all of this information is coming from Addison, who's not the scientist. So if it gets changed again, I'm okay with that, because so far she's been regurgitating that specific piece of information, and if she doesn't know how it works, I'm okay with that.
Right.
But I was like, oh wait, but I could also see the computer being everything, right? Ziggy and the accelerator together, which I feel like they're saying is connected to the code. So they may think that the computer is choosing, but it's the code that's actually choosing. I was a little confused about that,
because it has to be the code, right? Because it's the new code that Ben uploaded.
Exactly, but I can understand how in the first episode that Addison wouldn't understand the code yet, because they hadn't found the map. But I also wonder if they're just don't want to play so heavy on the God thing, which I totally understand. Which is why I was surprised and happy that that Ian brought up, oh well, Sam believed that God was doing it. But I don't feel like we've established that the computer is choosing, or the accelerator is choosing. But also, we're only halfway through the first season, so they could explain that in season 2, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Well, I think that the notion also is that to me anyway, the way that I process that information is that Ben programmed the accelerator, right? That Ben brought this program in that he had written, that he had crafted in order to send him to that point in the future that he needs to get to. And so I think for, from Ben's perspective, he has no clue what's happening, right? Because he can barely remember any of this stuff. But I think from the people at the project, like they see it as like the accelerator's doing the work, right? And I think that the thing that could be incorrect is assuming that Ben programs specific times and places. I think it's more, I think it's more just a general, like, I've got to hit this point to get to this point to get to this point, and that it's not the specific location. And maybe that's the work that the accelerator does, right? I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah. It feels like almost like an employment agency in my head. I mean, not literally, but like figuratively, right? That like Ben has come in to the bar, so to speak, with the bartender, but it's an employment industry, and it's like this is my trajectory that I have to hit. And then they go, well, we have a couple of jobs. Sam's busy.
Right.
Here's some jobs that that you can do, and we're going to assign you, which is because that's pretty much what is said in the finale, that that Sam can decide to leap, but the bartender will choose the assignments. Right?
Well, and I think that
you're looking at me weirdly.
The other notion is how much of that do we take at face value in light of the new series, right? And how much of that might not necessarily just be kind of an iteration of, of maybe Sam's spiritual side, and the idea that much like Ben has done in putting this program in, Sam basically did the same thing. It's just that nobody's aware of it because nobody understood. Because the thing that we're always told about Sam is that Sam is a once in a lifetime, mind. Like, whereas with Ben, it's a little, exactly. With Ben, it's a little different. With Ben, it feels like maybe there's some people that he was on equal footing with, right? Whereas with Sam, it's like nobody understood. Like nobody could have done Quantum Leap except for Sam. This isn't a case of like, if Sam hadn't done it, Ben would have done it eventually. This is literally like Ben had to follow what Sam did in order to do what he's doing. So it makes you wonder, and it also makes you wonder how much has changed with the project, and how much did Ben change things so that, maybe it doesn't function in exactly the same way that Sam's leaps were functioning. So, and yet maybe there is that element of will involved, that Ben is willing himself to do these things. He just doesn't know it or understand it yet.
I mean, I do think that is part of it too, because that's what the original series seems to suggest, right? Is that the leaper needs to be willing, which sounds a lot like what they've done with the leapee, right? Which is great, right? It's the same thing. It's like you must choose to do this. I'm not kidnapping you and forcing you to save people's lives. You want to do this. And I'm starting to think that may be one of the reasons, whether it's figured out by Ben and Addison, because it affects her if he chooses to stay, right? Later on in the series, which is interesting, right? It is subconsciously, maybe he likes what he's doing, and he wants to help people and wants to sacrifice his life for other people, and therefore doesn't come home. I mean, one of my favorite parts of the original finale script is Al at the bar, right? Is the bartender keeps saying, "You don't belong here. You are an alien. You don't belong here." But then he gives him the choice, and he says, "But if you want to do it, you will." And that's when Al is able to leap and find Sam. So free will is a very big part of this series, and the idea that you would give up your own life because you do want to help other people is a higher calling and a big sacrifice. And obviously he can't come home, because then there's no show.
Are we sure?
Right? Exactly. Yeah.
I don't know.
I wonder.
I've seen people from the show on your show say that, so that's what I'm saying. But sure, you could have it. But I think we have a star of the show. Just saying. But sure,
I don't know. Yeah,
different leaper every year. Maybe I would love to see an episode where we have some lightning and Addison and Ben switch places. That would be great. Sure. I want to see other people in the imaging chamber. I think mixing it up is always great.
Mm-hmm.
I think I don't know when we'll see it, but I do think that there will be a point when we do get to see maybe somebody else leap. I have no doubt that we're going to see other people in the imaging chamber. to kind of to bring things home from my end, I think that, again, this episode is such a perfect encapsulation and distillation of what this iteration of Quantum Leap is. And
Agreed.
it is such a shame if you're not watching the show that you would miss out on something like this, because the show has continued to grow. It has continued to get better and better. And it started off, I think, in a pretty damn good place. I go back and I think about like episode 3 in particular, and I'm like, man, we're 3 episodes in and this show's pretty much kicking ass at this point, and it continues to get better. Things continue to deepen, the relationships between the characters, the mysteries that are at play, the technology. I mean, we spent time talking about just the technology itself. The themes, the thematic elements of the show continue to have layer upon layer heaped upon them, and are explored in interesting ways. And I think that the use of foreshadowing has me questioning a lot, and I think that that's good, because there are certain expectations that I have, and I think certain payoffs that are probably coming in some fashion, and yet because of some of this potential foreshadowing, which could end up being red herrings, I'm asking questions like, is everybody safe? Are all of our regulars going to make it out of the season alive? Are all of our regulars going to make it out of the season still good guys? You know what I mean? Like, is there going to be a betrayal, a turn, or something like that? And of course, the line in this episode that Eugene has: great technology always falls into the wrong hands. One day it'll be the end of us all. And obviously that hits Ben, and it hit me, it landed on me. And it's like, maybe that's kind of the whole point, right? Is that Ben from the future that went to Ben in the past, if that's what happens, ended up telling, him and saying like, look, if you don't do this, it will be the end of us all. Which, hey, if that doesn't create a messiah complex for somebody, I mean, it's a good thing he doesn't remember everything. Otherwise he'd just be walking on water all the time.
Well,
but like,
but one could say, oh, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, kind of in closing, but I just think that this episode leaves us in such a wonderful place, and knowing that the next episode will be something very different from this, it just excites me so much, the way that they continue to explore and break new ground and do interesting things and tell stories that I feel like only they could tell. And I know, and hopefully he's not mad at me for saying this, because I don't think this was something off the record. I think he said it on the podcast, but Dean Georgaris even told us like that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to use this because he firmly believes, and I think they all believe, that they are in a position to be able to tell stories in such a way, and tell stories period, that no other network show can do.
And go big or go home.
Yeah, and I think they continue to do that, and I think next week will be a wonderful example of that as well. But I just thought this episode was superb. 10 Ziggies out of 10. I just made that up. I'm not going to bring that back. It's so dumb. But that's where I'm standing.
10 handlings. Shouldn't it be 10 handlings?
Sure, why not?
Did we ever do that? Did another podcast do that? You said you're going to bring it back.
No, I said I'm never going to bring that back.
You're never going to bring it back.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
I'll share.
Sorry. I feel like this episode is, we're going to look back at it and see a lot of the framework of the finale. I just feel like we're a little far in for some red herrings, to be honest. Like, and there's a lot of beats that I see being repeated that we've heard sort of offhanded. Even Jem was like, what if we triggered something for the future in a future project? Like, there's been a lot of sort of small little things. And one could say that the reason that Ben is so worried is because he subconsciously feels a deja vu. Because if he truly does know what he's there to do, then this would trigger that and feel familiar.
Right.
So maybe that idea isn't new. It's he's just fishing it out of his subconscious. But we'll see.
Dennis, what you got to say?
I have another. Do I want to go on? Fuck it. Let's go on another tangent.
Oh no.
So we know like Ben is leaping, like he's leaping to specific points in time to slingshot himself into the future.
Yeah.
Did Ben know that he was going to have to accomplish missions to get to the next point in time?
Sure, of course.
Or was he literally hoping to leap? And if he did know he had to accomplish missions, are these specific missions? Is he learning something out of each leap that he's going to have to use ultimately when he gets to his final goal?
That would be, I think you've hit on something. That would make sense, right? Because unlike Sam, he is remembering. But I would say that I think that what's helping that either is the change in technology. We could just say that. Sure, that's fine. No big reason to be explained. Or having someone like Addison at his side who he has an emotional connection to. in fact, I love the moment when she was like, "You remember all these movies, but not that you were in love with me for 4 weeks."
Oh, we didn't even talk about Ben's love of old movies. I
I
love that
know,
little
and I was
detail.
like,
That
Adam
was
said it's
great.
because it was too painful for him to remember.
Yeah,
That's why he loved you that much. But having her as an anchor, I could say maybe could do that, but still, like, yeah, like it is a very different Swiss cheese memory, right? Like he seems to retain a lot more. I mean, I think Sam did, but Sam also lost a lot of stuff along the way. It was more sort of like this with the memory as opposed to moving forward. So, yeah, I think that would be great if it's like a true video game. You're going from level to level to level, and every level you're just, you know, getting the PowerPoints and the different and everything everywhere all at once, which I just finally watched. Tapping into all of the different powers that you have, right? You know, but collected as you go. Yeah, you know, I mean, this episode is also, you know, sort of a video game structure as well as a
oh sure, right,
an escape room. But yeah, no, I think that would be really clever if they do that.
Well, he knows how to box.
Did you have any more final thoughts about the episode overall?
Oh, my very extensive notes. No, I have. I feel like we've covered most of them. You know, I will be curious going forward how much the theme of ghosts and phantoms and history of the past, you know, seeps into other seasons from a personal point of view, as opposed to just the mystery. So I'm looking forward to more of that.
I will throw one other thing out there about that is I think that it's a wonderful thing, and I'm not saying this is what happened, but to me it makes so much sense when you think about in terms of a revival, and you think about the fact that the writers, the actors, everybody involved in the show is literally having to deal with the ghost of the original series, right? Like that is something that is present for them, and it lends itself very well to exploring that type of stuff in the context of the show itself, which is lovely, and I think that they're doing an excellent job of it.
Yeah, well, I think if I think I've said this before on your show, but if the original series is sort of this metaphor, allegory, whatever you want to call it, on being a prisoner of war, being, trying to get home, whether that's a physical home, a literal home, the love of family, or a higher plane, heaven, going on, being a ghost, so forth, however you look at that. This show seems to be a lot about what's left behind after that, the home front, even though we are in the leaps, because we're seeing the project. And so that to me fits in, like we said, consequences and, what the aftermath is. What a perfect playground for a revival.
Well, and isn't it a wonderful thing to be able to take themes that were so important to the classic series and then apply them and change them in certain ways that fit this revival series, especially when you think about ghosts and you think about family and you think about how important those two things were to the classic series and how they were a driving force, especially for those early seasons. And now, we're seeing them played with in very different ways and new ways, which is fantastic. And we're getting these added elements of, the benefits and consequences of technology added on to the top of that. And I think it's something incredibly important to explore, right? 30 years ago, again, we didn't necessarily care as much if we were viewing a network television show about the consequences of this technology that Sam had invented. But 30 years later, when we're having to deal with the consequences of technology on a daily basis, of course we want to talk about that. Of course we want to see, when we read headlines about, Meta using your information and images and all this sort of stuff in ways that they shouldn't be, or, Google doing things that they shouldn't be, all this sort of stuff. It's like natural that of course we're going to want an exploration of that a little bit more, and I think that we're seeing it done in interesting ways, in subtle ways sometimes too, which is nice because it's not always just in your face. I think it's kind of the only way that it could be done, probably, because if you put it too much in your face, you just start to kind of like be like, yeah, I know, of course I know, I wake up to the newspaper every morning and see it. But yes, I mean, those phantoms, how they come into play and how they are a motivator I think that that's the other thing that's interesting about magic over the course of this episode. That motivating factor, this phantom from his past, someone that occupied his own space at one point in time, is such a motivator for him. And seeing the way that his character has clearly had to have grown from his time in Vietnam to coming home to where he is now, the way he talks to Addison, he has clearly benefited from some therapy at some point. Like that, we've talked about the paternal
even Al went
quality.
to therapy. I mean,
right. But we've talked about the paternal quality that magic has, which is absolutely true. This went beyond that. This was a sort of kindness that I feel like you get from someone that knows what they're talking about, just beyond kind of like grief. I've been there, you know what I mean? Like, this is definitely like somebody that has been deep down that hole and made their way out, and is now, helping the people that he loves while trying to accomplish something that's very important to him. And it's kind of incredible how passionate he seems about it. And I just think Ernie was firing on all cylinders this episode, as was everyone else. It was great.
It makes sense, right? I mean, he seems to have a lot of regrets in his life.
Yeah.
So wouldn't he want to have some sort of purpose to his life because he was given more of it?
Right.
Then he feels like maybe he thinks then his life was worth it.
Right. Yes. That Sam didn't save me for nothing. That I did something worth saving.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's an interesting story.
Sam, at the start of your final thoughts, you said that for anyone who's not watching the show, you're missing out. I'm paraphrasing you here. If you're not watching the show,
why are you listening to this podcast?
Why are you 2 hours deep?
Listen,
fair enough.
Only read the Wikipedia.
I know. I like, who are you to not watch the show, but you hate listen to Fate's Wide Wheel? Actually, I can think of one person. Anyway, anyway, overall, my final thoughts, everything which you all said, and like go back to what I said at the beginning, like this episode, I'm not going to say it's the best one yet, because I've said it before, and I know I'll probably say it after the next one for different reasons, but it tickled my brain in so many ways. Like, stories like this are why I love time travel, and it's why my neurodivergent brain latched onto that as my special interest when I was a little kid. And everything that you talked about in like this episode, I want to go back and I want to rewatch the first season of The Flash, because what you talk about, like ghosts and phantoms, and Lauren, you said you haven't seen it, but I know you love time travel. Don't commit yourself to the whole series, because it kind of turned into a mess. But
I will watch anything with time travel.
But
just send me your list. I'll watch the episodes.
That first season, even though not every specific episode has time travel, it's all a giant time travel story. Yeah. And it's all about phantoms and ghosts. And even if you don't watch a single episode after the first season, that first season,
time travel is always about ghosts. It's about regrets. It's about ghosts. It's about history. It's a human story wrapped in a fictional invention. But that's why we love science fiction, because it has a human element.
Absolutely. On that note, my final thought is, what did one podcast host who's been doing a show for 2 hours and 15 minutes say to the other?
We should split.
Gotta split.
Oh boy. I love that he didn't get to finish the joke. Anyway, so next week, you'll want to tune in on February 6th at 10 Eastern, 9 Central to NBC to see Let Them Play. Ben finds himself in 2012 in the midst of the Mendez family as they help their transgender daughter, Gia, who dreams of playing on her high school basketball team. Magic and Jen discover another piece of the puzzle of why Ben leapt in the first place. So lots of great stuff coming. Yeah, I think it's going to be. We heard that Shakina, the writer of the episode, is going to be doing a lot of press. So pay attention to what they have to say ahead of the episode, and of course after the episode. I'm really looking forward to it, and I think that this was great. Lauren, thank you so much for coming on and joining us once again.
Thank you for having me. Again, always hope I was coherent. So many other things that I want to talk about. But yeah, no, this was such a great episode. I'm so glad that I got to talk about it with you. Oh,
for sure. We'll do it again. We'll do it again. In the meantime, everyone, thank you so much for listening. Take care of yourselves. Take care of one another. Stay safe out there. And remember, I didn't get to say it last time. Dennis said it for me. I kind of liked it. I dug it. But I'm going to say it this time. So always remember to leap responsibly.